the artificial atmosphere of the Galactica Academy's research facility on Xeraxis 6, hummed with the constant thrum of environmental systems. In the main laboratory, a diverse group of cadets from across the galaxy bent over their survival assessment equipment, each carrying gear that represented the pinnacle of their species' technological achievement. The Venerian cadet Urzek manipulated holographic displays with tentacles that moved in precise, almost mechanical patterns. The crystalline Heliaxians cast ambient light while interfacing directly with their quantum processors. The Zephyrian twins floated slightly above the ground, their biomechanical implants glowing softly as they communicated through neural networks. Grace Martinez stood apart from them, all her simple survival pack looking primitive by comparison. As the only human cadet in this cohort, she had grown accustomed to the subtle looks of condescension from her classmates. While they relied on advanced atmospheric processors, nano-fabricated emergency shelters, and quantum communication arrays, Grace carried basic tools, a knife rope, flint, a collapsible shovel, and a few other implements that would have been familiar to explorers from Earth's past. Dr. Thessarian, the facility's lead survival instructor, was a towering Galactic Federation official whose species had mastered interstellar travel while Earth was still recovering from its last ice age. His voice resonated through the chamber as he explained the exercise. This survival assessment will test your ability to maintain life support systems for 72 hours on Xeraxis 6. Dr. Thessarian announced, his three eyes scanning the assembled cadets. The atmosphere contains only 8% oxygen, well below sustainable levels for most carbon-based life forms. Your emergency systems will provide baseline support, but should they fail? He paused dramatically. You must demonstrate the capability to survive using your own resources and ingenuity. The cadets nodded confidently. Each had backup systems upon backup systems. Their technology was fail-safe, redundant, and theoretically foolproof. Grace noticed the way they exchanged glances that seemed to say the same thing. This would be a routine exercise for anyone with proper equipment. Commander Zolvar, Dr. Thessarian's assistant and a member of the militant Draknari species, activated a holographic display showing the facility's layout. You will be isolated in sectors 7 through 12. He growled his translation collar, converting his native tongue into standard galactic. Each sector contains research equipment you may find useful. Remember, this is about more than just survival, it's about leadership under pressure. As the cadets dispersed to their assigned sectors, Zek slithered up to Grace with what she had learned to recognize as the Venerian equivalent of a smirk. Try not to suffocate while we're demonstrating proper survival techniques, human. He said, his voice carrying the harmonics of superiority that made the translator work overtime to convey the condescension. Grace simply nodded. See you on the other side, Urzek. The sectors were connected by a central corridor, each sealed off by blast doors that would open only in case of emergency. Grace's sector number 9 contained what looked like a hodgepodge of old research equipment. Some of it clearly decommissioned, other pieces looking like they belonged in a museum. She began her assessment, methodically checking the atmospheric readings, testing the equipment, and taking inventory of available resources. The first few hours passed without incident. Grace established a basic camp near the environmental controls, noting with some concern that the oxygen levels were slowly decreasing even with the systems running. She had dealt with marginal atmospheric conditions before during her survival training on Mars, but something felt different here. The equipment seemed older, more stressed than she would have expected for an academy facility. In Sector 7, the Heliaxian cadets had already deployed their emergency atmospheric deploys, creating a livable environment while they worked on what they termed optimization protocols. Zek in Sector 8 had activated his species' renowned bioatmospheric converters machines that could theoretically transform CO2 into breathable oxygen at the molecular level. By the 16th hour, Grace noticed the first irregularity. Her sector's environmental display showed a power fluctuation, brief barely detectable, but there nonetheless. She made a note and continued her work, improvising a rudimentary air circulation system, using the facility's ventilation shafts and a makeshift fan constructed from salvaged components. The 20th hour brought the first real crisis. Grace was cataloging some algae samples she had found in what appeared to be an abandoned hydroponics bay when the lights flickered. Not just once, but in a pattern that made her stomach drop. She had seen this before during her first year at the academy, when a solar storm had disrupted the power grid on Station Beta 7. But they were supposed to be isolated here. No outside interference should have been possible. Then came the alarm. The emergency klaxons wailing filled every corridor of the facility as blast doors began cycling between open and closed. Over the communication system, Dr. Thessarian's voice carried an edge of panic that made Grace's blood run cold. All cadets report. We have a cascade failure in the primary and secondary power systems. Emergency protocols are not responding. I repeat, we have a facility-wide emergency. Grace grabbed her equipment and ran to the blast door, separating her sector from the central corridor. Through the observation window, she could see other cadets emerging from their sectors, some in full environmental suits, others looking bewildered. Jacques' voice came through the communication system. My bioatmospheric converter isn't responding. The entire power grid to my sector just went dark. The Heliaxian cadets reported similar failures. Their atmospheric domes were collapsing, and their quantum processors showed complete system shutdown. Within 30 minutes, it became clear that whatever had failed wasn't just affecting the exercise equipment. It was affecting the life support systems for the entire facility. Dr. Thessarian and Commander Zolvar emerged from the command center, both looking grim. Dr. Thessarian's usual composed demeanor had cracked, revealing something Grace had never seen before in a senior academy official: fear. The quantum cascade reactor that powers this facility has suffered what appears to be a complete containment failure, he announced. All primary and secondary systems are down. Tertiary emergency power is maintaining minimal life support, but our calculations show it will last no more than 6 hours. 6 hours. Grace felt the weight of that statement. In 6 hours, the atmospheric recyclers would stop working. The temperature regulation would fail, and 37 beings would slowly suffocate in the thin air of Zaraxis 6. Our emergency beacon should have activated, Commander Zolvar added. It did not. We are for all intents and purposes stranded until the main reactor can be repaired or until rescue arrives. Dr. Thessarian looked at each of the cadets in turn. This is no longer an exercise. I am placing this facility under emergency survival protocols. Anyone with expertise in power systems atmospheric management or quantum mechanics is to report to the command center immediately. Most of the cadets rushed forward, eager to demonstrate their knowledge and technology. Grace hung back her mind, already working through what she had observed. As she watched her classmates crowd around the senior officers, she noticed something they seemed to miss. The environmental readings were dropping faster than Dr. Thessarian had indicated. His 6-hour estimate was optimistic. While the others debated quantum containment fields and emergency power roading, Grace slipped back into the facility. She had an idea, a ridiculous primitive idea that would probably get her laughed out of the academy if anyone heard it, but it might also save their lives. The abandoned hydroponics bay she had discovered earlier wasn't large, but it still contained functional algae tanks. The biological samples were dormant, but they were alive. More importantly, they were a species of blue-green algae that Grace recognized from her Earth biology course's organisms that could produce oxygen through photosynthesis at a rate far exceeding their mass. But she would need light, lots of it, and power. Grace began moving through the facility, systematically gathering what she needed. Emergency lighting units that ran on independent fuel cells, reflective panels from the wall displays, tubing from the water reclamation systems. She worked quietly, aware that her classmates would likely try to stop her if they saw what she was doing. Why waste time on primitive biology when there were sophisticated technological solutions to explore. By the fourth hour, as reports from the command center grew increasingly desperate, Grace had assembled her makeshift oxygen generation system. The algae tanks were connected in series with emergency lighting, providing the energy they needed for photosynthesis. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't advanced, but it was producing oxygen. The first person to notice was Rizek, who had left the command center in frustration after another attempted power reroute had failed. He slithered into the hydroponics bay and stopped dead, his sensory tentacles twitching as they detected the elevated oxygen levels. "What is this?" he demanded. "What are you doing with those organisms?" Grace didn't look up from the algae tank she was adjusting. "Making oxygen." "That's impossible. Biological oxygen generation at a useful rate requires specific environmental conditions that we have," Grace interrupted. "Food source light CO2 water. They're producing oxygen right now." Jack's tentacles writhed in what Grace had learned to recognize as extreme agitation. "You're creating a primitive biological system when we need real solutions. This is exactly why humans shouldn't be in the academy. You don't understand the complexity of—" His words were cut off by an alarm. Not the facility emergency klaxon, but personal atmospheric alarms. Grace looked at her environmental scanner and felt her heart sink. Oxygen levels throughout the facility had dropped below 14%. At 12%, people would start losing consciousness. At 10%, they would die. "We have less than 2 hours," she told Urzek firmly. "Your quantum processors are dead. Your bioatmospheric converters are dead. Your atmospheric domes are dead. This works." As if to prove her point, the algae tanks bubbled visibly, releasing streams of oxygen-rich gas into the water and consequently into the air above them. Word spreads quickly in a crisis. Soon, the hydroponics bay was crowded with cadets and instructors. Dr. Thessarian pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes taking in Grace's improvised system with what appeared to be stunned disbelief. "Cadet Martinez," he said slowly, "please explain what you've done here." Grace took a deep breath of the noticeably fresher air near her tanks. "I've set up a simple photosynthetic oxygen generation system using dormant algae strains. These particular specimens can produce oxygen at roughly 35% above their body mass per hour under optimal conditions. I've linked 17 tanks in series, provided adequate lighting through portable fuel cell units, and created circulation using the facility's existing ventilation systems. Current output is approximately 47 liters of pure oxygen per hour." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Commander Zolvar spoke, his voice uncertain. "But this is basic biology. Surely the power requirements—" "The fuel cells were designed for 72-hour operation on emergency power," Grace explained. "They're immune to the quantum cascade failure because they're closed-system chemical batteries. The algae need only basic nutrients, which I've extracted from the facility's emergency rations, and light in the spectrum range these units provide." Dr. Thessarian's 3 eyes focused on Grace with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. "How long can this system maintain oxygen production?" "With proper nutrient management and assuming we can maintain the fuel cells, weeks, maybe months." The silence stretched again. Then, unexpectedly, it was broken by one of the Heliaxian cadets Zen Grace thought his name was. His crystalline form flickered with internal light as he spoke. "The human is correct. I am detecting oxygen production consistent with her calculations. More importantly—" He paused, his inner light pulsing. "Atmospheric readings show that oxygen levels have stabilized in this area. They are not merely stable, they are rising." As if to punctuate his statement, Grace noticed that her own breathing had become easier. The crushing weight she had been feeling in her chest was lifting. Jacques, who had been silent since the others arrived, suddenly burst into action. His tentacles moved in rapid, complex patterns as he began gathering equipment. "If this system works," he said, his voice strained with what sounded like forced humility, "we should expand it. replicated in other areas. Actually, Grace said carefully, we can optimize this installation first. More tanks, better circulation, improved light distribution. We don't need to recreate everything, we just need to scale what's working. The next several hours were a blur of activity. Grace found herself coordinating a team of alien cadets who hung on her every word. The Heliaxians used their natural light-bending abilities to optimize the photosynthesis spectrum. The Zephyrian twins applied their aerial maneuvering skills to improve circulation throughout the facility. Even Rizek proved helpful, his bioatmospheric expertise, helping to fine-tune the nutrient balance in the algae tanks. By the time rescue ships arrived 18 hours later, they found a facility with better atmospheric conditions than it had started with. The emergency had been resolved not through advanced technology, but through the application of fundamental biological principles that any first-year academy student should have understood. In the aftermath, as investigators tried to determine what had caused the quantum cascade failure, Grace found herself the subject of intense attention. Dr. Thessarian submitted a report recommending her for immediate advancement. Commander Zolvar Gruff, as always, mentioned something about obvious command potential. But it was Rizek's words that stuck with her. As they waited for transport back to the main academy station, he approached her with what she now recognized as a gesture of respect among his people. I owe you an apology, he said. I believed that sophistication was the same as effectiveness, that your methods were primitive because your tools were simple. I was wrong. Grace smiled, looking back at the hydroponics bay, where her algae tanks continued their steady work of converting CO2 to life-sustaining oxygen. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones hiding in plain sight. We just have to be willing to look past the complexity to see the simple truth underneath. As their transport ship docked and they prepared to leave Ziraxis 6, Grace realized something had changed. The looks from her fellow cadets were different now. No longer condescending, they held a mixture of respect and curiosity. She was no longer just the human cadet who carried primitive tools. She was the cadet who had saved 37 lives with a fundamental understanding of biology and an unwillingness to panic when technology failed. The journey back to the academy gave Grace time to reflect on what had happened. The emergency had revealed something important about their advanced galactic civilization. In their rush to create more sophisticated solutions, they had sometimes forgotten the fundamentals. Every species in the galaxy knew about photosynthesis. They all understood that plants produced oxygen. But when crisis struck, they had looked to their quantum processors and nanofabricators instead of the simple, reliable biological processes that had sustained life for billions of years. Dr. Thessarian found her on the observation deck as they approached the academy station. His three-eyed gaze was thoughtful as he joined her at the viewport. I've been thinking about what happened, he said, about how close we came to losing everyone. Grace nodded. The cascade failure was unpredictable. No one could have... Not the failure, he interrupted. The response? We had 17 brilliant minds in that facility representing some of the most advanced species in the galaxy. Every one of us reached for technological solutions to a technological problem, except you. I'm just good at working with what's available, Grace replied. Dr. Thessarian's secondary eyes blinked a sign of deep consideration among his people. Perhaps we've become so enamored with our sophistication that we've forgotten what effectiveness actually means. You saw a solution that none of us could see because you never stopped thinking like a survivor. As the academy station grew larger in the viewport, its docking bays busy with incoming and outgoing ships, Grace felt a shift in how she viewed her place in this galactic community. She wasn't the odd one out because she lacked advanced technology. She was unique because she understood something that could be forgotten in the pursuit of ever greater complexity. That the best solutions were often the simplest ones, and that survival wasn't about having the most advanced tools, it was about understanding how to use whatever tools you had most effectively. The rest of the cadets had learned something too. In their reports, which would later become required reading at survival training courses throughout the galaxy, they wrote not about the failure of technology, but about the importance of fundamental knowledge and creative thinking. The Heliaxians noted how their light manipulation abilities had new applications when combined with biological systems. The Zephyrians developed new techniques for atmospheric management based on what they learned about circulation patterns. Rizek went on to specialize in hybrid biotechnological systems, becoming one of the galaxy's leading experts in combining primitive biology with advanced engineering. As Grace walked through the Academy corridors upon their return, she noticed how cadets from other programs stopped to nod respectfully. Word had spread, as it always did in military academies, about the human cadet who had saved an entire facility using nothing but algae and emergency lighting. But more than that, word had spread about a different way of thinking, one that valued adaptability over specialization. Fundamental understanding over technological dependency. The incident on Zeraxis 6 became known as the Algae Crisis. Though Grace always thought that name missed the point, it wasn't about algae. It was about remembering that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best solutions, that crisis revealed character, and that leadership wasn't about having the best equipment. It was about knowing how to make whatever you had work when it mattered most. In the years that followed, as Grace moved through her academy training and into active service, she would face many other crises. Some would be technological, some environmental, some interpersonal. But whenever she felt overwhelmed by the complexity of a problem, she would remember those algae tanks bubbling away in the hydroponics bay of Zeraxis 6, producing life-sustaining oxygen through a process as old as multicellular life itself. She would remember Dr. Thessarian's words about effectiveness versus sophistication, and Rizek's hard-won wisdom about looking past complexity to see simple truth. Most importantly, she would remember that the greatest advances often came not from creating something new, but from applying something fundamental in a new way. The Academy added a new course to its curriculum the following year: Fundamental Survival Principles Across Species. It was taught by Dr. Thessarian with guest lectures from several of the Zeraxis 6 cadets. Grace was asked to design the section on biological resource utilization, and to this day, every Academy cadet learns about photosynthetic oxygen generation before they learn about atmospheric processors. It was a small change, perhaps, in the vast educational system of a galactic civilization, but it represented something larger, an acknowledgement that no matter how far technology advanced, no matter how sophisticated our solutions became, there would always be value in understanding the simple fundamental principles that governed life itself. Grace Martinez graduated with honors and was commissioned as a lieutenant in the Galactic Federation's Exploration Corps. Her first assignment took her to the edge of explored space, where she would lead survey teams on planets where technology might fail, where backup systems might not work, and where the ability to improvise solutions from available resources could mean the difference between life and death. She met each new challenge with confidence, knowing that she carried with her not just advanced equipment, but something more valuable: the knowledge that every problem, no matter how complex, had a solution somewhere in the fundamentals, and the wisdom to look for that solution even when everyone else was reaching for more sophisticated tools. Years later, when young cadets asked her about the incident on Zeraxis 6, Grace would smile and tell them that the most important lesson wasn't about algae or oxygen generation. It was about keeping your mind open to all possibilities, even the simple ones, especially the simple ones. Because in the end, survival wasn't about having the best technology. It was about having the best understanding of how to make anything work when you needed it most. The algae tanks in that abandoned hydroponics bay had saved 37 lives, not because they were advanced or sophisticated, but because they worked. In a universe of quantum processors and nanofabricators, sometimes the solution that worked was all that mattered. Grace carried that lesson with her. Wherever she went, a reminder that the simplest answers were often right in front of us. We just had to be wise enough to see them.